And before I continue, let me direct the committee secretary to acknowledge our guest.
Good morning, Your Honors. For today's public hearing on the ease of paying taxes bills, we have the following resource persons. From the Department of Finance, we have Assistant Secretary Dakila Napao. From the Bureau of Internal Revenue, we have Mr. Larry M. Barcelo, Ms. Clavelina S. Nakar, and Ms. Maria Luisa Ibelen. From the Tax Management Association of the Philippines, we have Attorney Fulvio D. Dawilan. From PwC Philippines, we have Attorney Maria Lourdes P. Lim. From RSM Philippines, we have Attorney William Benson S. Gan and Attorney May Dayan M. Azores. From PNA Grant Thornton, we have Director Maria Lourdes Palitado Aklan, Attorney Olivier D. Aznar, and Maria Lourdes P. Aklan. From Deloitte Philippines, we have Attorney Tristan Lopez. Also from Du Baladad and Associates, we have Attorney Fulvio D. Dawilan from TMAP. From SMIC Corporate Tax, we have Attorney Crescencio Meneses and Mr. Louis June Reyes Mendoza. From Chemonics International Incorporated, we have Mr. Joseph Armovit. That will be all, Your Honor.
Thank you, Comsec. Good morning, everyone, and it's good to finally see everyone face to face. I think during the past few months, we've been requesting to meet the stakeholders, especially the tax experts, and we've been doing it on a virtual manner. And a lot of our hearings were conducted also on a hybrid manner during the past hearing. So today is actually hybrid, but most of our important or key resource persons are here face to face. So thank you very much for coming here. I also beg your indulgence and apology for the, I think we're still doing the antigen or PCR? Antigen, no? Either, okay. The test, I think it's still part of the precautionary measures of the Senate, considering that the Senate is a magnet for people. And if you can see outside, a lot of hearings are being conducted simultaneously, and we get a lot of guests all over the country. So as part of our precautionary measures, the Senate still requires antigen test at the very least for our guests. But thank you very much for your presence and your participation. And today we'll be tackling two measures, SBN 134, introduced by yours truly, and House Bill number 4125, introduced by Representative Salceda, Swansing, Briones, Dayanghirang, Dioniso, Haresco, and a few other congressmen. These two bills are known as the Ease of Paying Taxes Bill. No? And I know that during the last Congress, 18th Congress, this bill has hurdled third reading in the lower house. Unfortunately, the Senate never tackled this bill, or it didn't have time to tackle this bill. But today we'll be hearing these two bills, and these two bills deals with primarily easing up or streamlining administrative processes in terms of paying taxes. Let me just put some qualifications on record. This committee decided to split the administrative portion and the Bill of Rights portion into two bills. No? So we'll have a separate bill for the Bill of Rights because the House bill has two portions. So they have the administrative, and towards the end, they have the Bill of Rights. But we deemed it necessary to separate the Bill of Rights so that it will be a standalone bill, and it will contain, because the House version, the Senate version contains more details. It also includes obligations of the taxpayer. No? So And we also put a lot of functions and details on the taxpayer advocate. So upon consulting our committee secretary and the team, we decided to separate the two bills. So today we'll just focus on the administrative portion. No? ASEC Dakila was present when we were talking about the Bill of Rights portion. No? So we'll be we won't touch into the Bill of Rights portion of the measures today. So today we'll be tackling these two bills, focusing on the administrative portion, and just as a opening statement, I always viewed, ever since I was a mayor, a local chief executive Valenzuela, I always viewed our taxpayer as customers. In Valenzuela, that's our mentality, that our taxpayers, regardless if they are micro, because it's a local government, you deal with micro businesses also. You have taxpayers as simple as fish vendors, market vendors, and in Valenzuela, we have a fixed rate to attract the micro industries to register with the local government unit. But our philosophy there, and until now, my philosophy is the taxpayer, we should treat our taxpayer as our customers, as they pay our salaries, our expenses, everything here in the Senate derives from the tax being paid by our taxpayers. So with that, like any other business, normal business endeavor, you want our customers to have a simple life, a convenient life, and our customers to have access to the most latest digital technologies in terms of purchasing, or in this case, in terms of paying taxes. No? So that is the simple philosophy of the measures today. No? So the measures aim to simplify the life of our taxpayer, make it convenient, enable them to use technology as a means to pay taxes, and we want to also clarify and simplify a lot of the concepts that were being practiced already in the past. No? So we want to hear the opinion of our experts, because some of the concepts here, as we go along, I will discuss that. Some of the concepts here have been a usual practice for many, many years, but we plan to change it in the spirit of simplicity. No? So, and we want to, there might be unintended consequences in doing so. So we want to hear our practitioners on their opinion on those changes that we plan to make. So again, today, just to emphasize, these bills, the two bills, aims to make the lives of our taxpayers much simpler, much easier, more convenient, and have access to technology. And with that, we will encourage more people, no, to register, more businesses to register, more taxpayers to register. Hopefully, broaden the tax base. And when we broaden the tax base, we increase revenue collection and make it more efficient for all of us. No? So that's the overarching goal of these two measures. So with that, we've provided the body the two measures, and we'll just do the rounds. We'll start off with, of course, our chief collector of the country, the BIR, on their opinion. The bills are quite extensive. No? We deal with a lot of things here, a lot of different concepts. But we'll start off with the mother agency first, no? With DOF, and then later on we go to BIR, and then we hear all our resource persons. Feel free to voice out your opinion. Hopefully, this will be a comprehensive, and this will be the last time we will be talking about improving tax administration. So we want to make it as comprehensive as possible, but simple. No, I know tax measures tend to be quite in the process of simplifying it, we make it complicated. No, so we have to be mindful that the aim is to simplify. So, but I know that there are a lot of things that we have to navigate with. So we need your expertise in looking at unintended consequences as we move along. So with that, we'll start off with the DOF, and then we'll have the DOF's comment, and then we'll do the round. So, may senators ba? Do we have any senators present? Virtual. Okay. So we'll be joined by other senators later on, but not to belabor and delay the proceedings, we can already call on the Department of Finance represented by ASEC Tequila.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. Good morning also to our secretariat, fellow reviewers, other distinguished guests, resource persons. Good morning. The Department of Finance welcomes the filing of the bills, House Bill 4125 and Senate Bill 1346, for the ease of paying taxes. These were filed by the committee chairs of both the House and the Senate. The DOF agrees with the overall intention of the bills, which is to simplify the tax processes and as well as payment procedures. We do have recommendations, Mr. Chair, and I have also seen the positions and comments of the BIR. We will provide them, Mr. Chair, during the rounds of when we get to the provisions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's quite comforting that to hear from the DOF that you support the two measures. Of course, the devil is in the details later on, no? But the support from DOF is important, as DOF will be implementing the bill through the BIR. So it's comforting to hear that support. I guess we will go to the BIR to discuss the details. And as we go along, feel free to, we'll let the BIR finish first, and then later on we can comment. No? So we call on the BIR represented by Assistant Commissioner Attorney Barcelo.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and fellow resource speakers. For the BIR, Your Honor, the BIR supports and commends the introduction of new measures of tax administration through the modernization and simplification of tax compliance procedures, as this would ease the payment and filing of taxes and boost the BIR's tax collection efforts, and thus increasing the government's revenue. The BIR, however, Your Honor, recommend the following on the retention of pay as you file. The BIR suggests to retain the existing pay as you file system to mandate taxpayers to pay as soon as they file the return. Even with the existing pay as you file system, there are still number of taxpayers that merely file the returns but do not pay the tax due. In separating the acts of filing and payment, this will increase the chances of taxpayers in filing but not paying their taxes. On the venue of restrictions in filing and paying estate tax and donors taxes, we suggest to retain the venue for filing and paying estate tax for donors taxes. This is because, Your Honor, in the transfer of properties to inheritance or donation, there are cases when several properties are involved. In order to ensure that all properties are properly accounted for, valuated, and consolidated in one return, the BIR believes that the venue restrictions should be retained in sections 90 and 103 of the tax code. On the removal of registration fee, we suggest that this should be retained. The amount is merely limited to the cost of the license, the inspection fees, and carrying out the regulations of the BIR. The purpose of the registration fee is to downsize the BIR spending and yet maintain its obligation of providing efficient services to the public. Thus, removing the 500 registration fee may have adverse effects as to the expenditures of the Bureau. Yes, Your Honor. And lastly, on the issuance of receipts or invoices, we suggest that the amount of 100 be maintained for the issuance of sales receipts of invoices for sale or transfer of merchandise or services. The importance of the issuance of duly registered receipts or invoices is to monitor the business transactions of taxpayers and to ensure that such transactions are properly accounted for. Also, the actual sale of the taxpayer may be difficult to determine, considering that the increase of the threshold amount of the sale of merchandise or services from 100 to 500 is too substantial. Additionally, this office believes that receipts or invoices must be issued regardless of the value of the merchandise or services. Without such receipts or invoices, there might be difficulty to determine the VAT due, the value added tax due, and the same cannot be correctly evidenced, computed, and properly remitted to the BIR. And the receipts and invoices are necessary on the part of the buyer so that they can validly claim their purchases as expenses and claim deductions from its gross income. It is also, the buyer is also, if it is a VAT registered, he or she may also apply for tax refund for the excess of input VAT if the transaction is properly substantiated, Your Honor. And these comments, Your Honor, our comments are subject to the position or the policy direction of the Department of Finance. The comments, Your Honor, are signed by our Commissioner, Romeo D. Lumagi Jr. It was submitted to the office of your office, Your Honor.
Thank you. Thank you, Assistant Commissioner. Yun lang, apat lang. Konti lang, ah. Okay, I was expecting a lot, pero that's good. That means we can move faster. I just have I'll discuss the unless the other members of the BIR will have any comments before we move on, or is that a unified position? No? All right, sige. Thank you. I just have some questions that I want to get your opinion and put on record so that people who will read the transcript in the future will be enlightened on our discussion. I'll talk about the classification. No? In the bill, it calls for, well, initially, no, our intention was to create different classifications for micro, small, medium, and large. No? But in the House version, it calls for the creation of a medium classification. I read the position papers of the different stakeholders, and they do agree. All actually agrees on the creation of a medium classification. So I just want to get the opinion of the BRR on number one. Is that something that the BRR supports? And then number two, how many businesses are currently classified as medium? I know there's no direct classification, no, but based on your experience, no, just an estimate, how many are considered medium, and what criteria officially do you use for medium corporations? So let's talk about that first. If you support that proposal.
Good morning, Chair, and to our fellow public servants, to the guests, good morning. As far as the classification of our taxpayers in the Bureau is concerned, we do have large taxpayers for the large taxpayer service. And in the region, we do have these taxpayers who are classified as large in the region or in the district, which are under our tax account management program, or these are taxpayer under the tax account management program considered as large because they do make an 80% contribution of their tax payments to the entire collection of the district. So that's how the TAMP taxpayers are identified.
We have a medium, oh, just for the record, no, do we have a classification for medium? Medium and small and micro? Meron ba?
At the moment, sir, we don't have.
We don't have any classification, at least for the medium.
There was a time that we had medium, we've classified 500 for each region, medium taxpayers.
What's the criteria, Assistant Commissioner, to be classified as medium?
These
What-
are taxpayers with first 500 taxpayers as to their tax payments of the region.
First 500 taxpayers.
Taxpayers of the region, top taxpayers of the region in accordance with their tax payments.
But they're not exactly medium, no? The first 500, can they also be considered large?
It could be, but we do only have, at the moment, 2,600 large taxpayers at the large taxpayer service.
Okay. What do you consider large taxpayers? Just for the record, do you use a
We do have criteria in the selection of the large taxpayer service according to payments and according to payments on income taxes and payments on withholding taxes. So 100,000. Just can't remember the exact figure, the amount used.
There's a provision, Your Honor, in the tax code to consider as large taxpayer when the payment is of what totals or amounts to 1 million, and also income tax. That's the provision in the tax code.
Okay. But if the bill calls for the creation of a medium classification, is that possible? And will the BIR support that?
Yes, Your Honor, we support that.
What do you think should be the classification for a medium-sized taxpayer? Meron ba kayong initial discussion on that internally?
Before, Mr. Chair, before we were trying to classify our medium taxpayers, but because the provision in the tax code is provides for a very low classification for the large taxpayers, so we had difficulty. So that's why we came up with a program we call TAMP, or the Tax Account Management Program, where we identified the large, big taxpayers of the regional offices. So in a way, those are the medium taxpayers because we have already established who are the large taxpayers being handled by the large taxpayer service. So these taxpayers in the regional offices, at the regional level, they are considered as large, but for the national level, they are the medium taxpayers handled by the regional offices. We are not yet final on as to how we will determine the same, because when we check with the DTI, the basis for the classification of the MSMEs are the assets. So for the BIR, because we are the tax collecting agency, we deem it right. I think that based on our initial study, the gross sales and receipts, because that would mean the bigger transactions or business transactions that is being handled by the particular taxpayer and the tax payments. So something like that, we will be working on that two basis.
That's what I understand. The large taxpayers are handled here, no, in the national, and then at the region level, the first 500 non-individual taxpayers are considered medium for, I think that's an internal definition, no? But those medium can be large also if you compare it with the national level. So in other words, there's no strict criteria on what is a large, what is a medium classification. So may I request, because that's the one of the features of the bill, may I request from BIR to furnish us the classification for large and what do you think the classification for medium should be? No? Because we're still deciding and subject to the suggestions of our stakeholders. I read some of the position paper that we should already define by law what is large, medium, and even small and micro. No? But we'll seek guidance from the BAR on if we decide to put that, embed that in the law, what should be the criteria or qualification. In the proposal of the House, the DOF and the BIR are given powers to define. No? But we also got suggestions from our stakeholders to define it already in the law. No? So we'll hear that later on, no? What will be a good way forward. And then at the same time, in some of the position papers also suggested to include small and micro. No? What's your opinion on that? Because based on the statistics that I saw, 90% of our revenue comes from the large and the medium. No? And correct me if I'm wrong. And then 10% comes from the small and micro. I don't know if the micro is paying. That's why I would also request from the BIR if that 10, what is the breakdown of that 10%. But do you suggest to include? Do you also agree to include small and micro as part of the segmentation, or is that that's too minute and taxing for the BIR already, considering that they are only 10% of the total revenue?
For now, I think it would be proper that we just classify it as large and medium because all the rest will follow as being a small because the tax due is either VAT or percentage. So all the rest that will be below the threshold of the VAT will be paying the percentage taxes.
So it's more important to classify the large and the medium. Yeah. Nevertheless, may I also request from BAR, if ever we do classify all the way down to micro, what should be the criteria used. No? Right now, I read all the materials. The classification for MSMEs are all asset-based. No? Whether it's in BMBE, it's in DTI, or in the SEC, it's all asset-based. No? I think BIR is it's the only agency using gross sales or gross receipts for its large taxpayers. No? So it's a different classification. That's why we want to request from the BRR on if we do classify it, what should be the basis? No? Obviously, it's gross sales. But other than gross sales, do we also use payment of taxes or other criteria? No, I will request from the BRR on that matter. And later on, we'll ask our resource person. Just take note on that part. Another question I have, and this is consistent, is the registration fee. I heard Attorney Barcelo earlier, the suggestion of the BIR is to retain the registration fee. Um, I think the essence here is to simplify matters, no? Since 500 is only a small amount, the suggestion of both the House and the Senate bills is to remove it. So my question is, how much do we get from the 500? How much? First of all, how much are paying the 500 peso registration? And then second, how much is the total amount that we are collecting?
Usually, Your Honor, the taxpayer that are paying the registration fee are those engaged in business or exercise of profession. And we have data here on the collection of registration fee for 2019 up to October 2022. For 2019, we have a collection for the registration fee of 1.7 billion pesos. And for 2020, it's about 1.3 billion. For 2021 is 1.36 or almost 1.4. And for January to October 2021, for January to October 2022, that's 1.4 billion, Your Honor.
I guess the rationale is it's quite substantial in terms of collection. And how many are paying this 1.4 in 2022? How many entities are, how many registered, VAT registered entities are paying?
Right now, Mr. Chair, right now, as of October 2022, we have around 1.275 corporate taxpayers. And for the individual, we have around paying the business taxpayers only around 4.5 million. Self-employed, including the professionals and the single proprietorship.
The 1.2 corporate taxpayers?
Yes, po.
And then-
Including those are taxable and exempt. We have the
Okay.
taxable taxpayers of 958 for the corporate and 299 for the exempt corporations and NRFC, non-resident foreign corporations, of 17,006. So a total of 1.275 million. For the self-employed, we have a total of 4.514, broken down into 1,064 million professionals and 3.449 single proprietorship.
So about more or less, no?
Yes,
5.7.
5.7, yes.
5.7
Taxpayers.
taxpayers
Who will be
registered.
paying the 500 annual registration
Okay.
fees.
I'm just thinking out loud now. Will the removal of the 500 pesos encourage more registration? And when they register, encourage more, for example, they will pay income tax or they will pay their forms of taxes, other internal taxes. The concept here is to encourage people to register, and also to ease the burden of collecting the 500, because collecting the 500 is also an administrative task, So the concept here is to do away with that, to encourage more people to come in. Will that compensate the 1.4 billion that will be lost?
Sir, for the BIR, it will matter because not only the amount, but it will also confirm that the taxpayer is still registered for the particular year because that's an annual registration fee. Most of the taxpayers do not close, end date their registration with us so that that uh, complexes the the monitoring of the taxpayers who are cannot be located and all those things that happens really. So in terms of filing and payment, we have already the online facilities for the filing of the return 0605 and the payment. So we have several facilities already for the payment. So I don't think that would be a burden to the taxpayers.
So the 500 registration fee is a way also of cleaning up your database.
Yes,
Because if it's free, obviously they will not
would not know anymore.
you will not know whether the corporation is still
Continues.
operational or not. Okay. Mm. Okay. Because we're also thinking of simplifying the life of the collector. So the 500 is it's small, but you're talking about 5.7 million registrants. So in other words, that's also an administrative cost. Is there a way to remove the 500 pesos but still update your records? Is there a mechanism for
Right now, we have recently launched this month the ORUS or ORUS, the online registration and update system for the taxpayers. So gradually, we will be implementing that for all the taxpayers because that was primarily developed for the non-resident first because they can do it online and update their registration data with us online. Because right now we're trying to capture all the email addresses because of the difficulties in reaching out to those taxpayers who are not really physically near the different offices. Uh, it is very important that we will have this ARF for the BIR really.
can we do the registration at the same time when they file their returns?
Because the registration fee, Your Honor, is due every January of each year. So the payment of the taxes has a different deadlines for each of the returns that are being filed by a particular taxpayer when they register because they already know, we already informed them of what forms or tax types that they have to pay and the deadlines that are due to file and pay these kinds of taxes. The ARF really is on or before January 31 of each year.
My point there is if you will file your returns, obviously you're an active taxpayer. So, like in the LGU, there's no registration for the LGU. Once you renew your business permit, automatically you're already an active taxpayer. No,
But, sorry.
no, go ahead,
That
ma'am.
was annual permit also that
That's
they
an
are
annual permit. Yes.
securing from the LGUs.
My point there is there's no registration, but to detect whether you're active or not is through the renewal of your business permit. Because the renewal of your business permit, the basis also is your gross sales. Diba? So, um, so parang sabay siya. Parang sabay siya.
Yes po. For the BIR, parang it's like a renewal also.
Yeah, but it's not sabay. So, meaning you register first and then iba yung tax filing of your tax return. So, can it be simultaneous? Is it possible?
Mr. Chair, the reason why we do have registration first, it's because there are still some documents that need to be secured by our taxpayers, especially so with the issuance of the sales invoices. So for every transaction that our taxpayers will have, it must be supported by invoice. So how can our taxpayers issue a receipt if they are not yet registered? So mauuna po sana yung registration. So there will also be registration of the books of accounts wherein taxpayers will be recording their transactions so that at the end of the day, they will know how much must be paid.
We'll get the opinion of our experts later on, the practitioner. I'm just again, no, I'm just trying to lessen the point of contact as much as possible. But I do um, um, recognize the opinion of the BIR, no? Especially that's why earlier I said we have to be mindful of the unintended consequence. No, in simplifying, in the process of simplifying, we might be touching on another matter that we are not seeing, and it will have consequences later on. So we'll take note of that, but we'll ask the opinion of our resource persons later on, no, para sabay-sabay na. Another concept that it's in the bill, and this is actually even internally we had a huge debate on in simple terms, no, we will only issue gross invoice for both goods and services. No, that's a proposal here in both measures. And I understand is the foreign chambers present here? Wala siya, no? In the I took note of the position paper of the foreign chambers that apparently we're the only country which issues sales invoice for goods and sales receipts for services. No? So to simplify the life of everyone, including the collector, in the proposal, there's only going to be one, no? Sales invoice for both goods and services. No? I think that's a dramatic change from the way we practice things. So may I get the opinion of the BIR if that's is that feasible, or any comment to that?
Mr. Chair, we support
Okay naman. All right.
the
Okay.
portion on the single kind of receipt.
Okay. Yeah. To be honest, internally, we don't even agree with one another, but it's good to hear BIR supporting that. Okay. There's also another concept that will be removed here, and the removal of city and municipal treasurer as collecting agent. Is that something that, first of all, is that being practiced? Because when I was a mayor for 9 years, I've never collected for the BIR, to be honest. I don't recall. In fact, I check our treasurer; it's never being practiced. So, in the Senate version, we removed it. No?
Yes, Mr. Chair, because at the moment, municipal treasurers and city treasurers are not being used. Their services are not actually needed in the collection of our national taxes. It's because we do have revenue collecting officers in all cities and municipalities. And with the advent of our digitalization, we do have several e-payment channels.
Yeah,
And we do have authorized agent banks too.
yeah. The BIR is present in all cities, no?
Cities and municipalities.
Okay. And with technology now, it's actually quite there's no advantage for the LGU to collect in behalf of the BIR because the BIR is present in all cities, all ba? 1,500 cities and municipalities?
Yes, sir. But though there are only a few that our RCOs are concurrent, meaning serving more than one municipalities, but still, they do have presence in that municipality.
jurisdiction.
And every week, yes.
Yeah, okay. But the physical office, how many physical offices does BIR have on the ground? Just for discussion. Definitely one per region, for sure.
One per region,
But one per
dis-
city, meron?
one per
147 cities?
The office of our RCOs are joined in with the local government units. So we do seek assistance from the local government units to house our BIR personnel.
But how many, other than the regional offices, how many offices do you have on the ground?
We do have 132 offices, including large taxpayers. So
100
RDOs, Revenue District Offices.
Yeah, 132 RDOs, including so almost all cities actually. 147 ng cities eh. No, almost all. No? And there's also another proposal. Right now, the authorized agent banks, no, are I think the way payments are being conducted right now, you can only pay where your AAB is located to your RDOs, correct? Tama po ba yung description ko?
Yes po, for manual payment.
Yeah, for manual payment.
Opo.
But meaning for a taxpayer who is registered to a particular RDO, I'm only allowed to pay to a particular AAP, no? Or that AAB that is located within your RDO. That's the
AAB
mechanism.
located within the RDO, but for those municipalities or municipalities without AAB, we do have our revenue collecting officers. So they do also collect taxes. And that's why we do advertise the A-payment so that wherever they may be, they could pay anytime with 24/7.
Yeah. But in the bill, both bills call for any AAB. So no particular AAB, meaning you can be registered in a, let's say, in a different RDO, but you will pay in a different AAB. Is that something that you support?
For manual filing, at the moment, for manual filing, that's the way it is. You pay within the area of where your business is located. But since, as I've said a while ago, that we do advertise, expand our e-payment channels, so if taxpayers will be using e-payment, then they could file anywhere. No, rather, they could pay anywhere, and anytime they could pay also. So it's a system that will be used 24/7. And okay, anyways, yung crediting naman, so okay lang tayo. Senator, Mr. Chair, it's okay for us on yung pay anywhere. It's because the system of our system will be transferring payments wherever it was made to where the taxpayer is registered.
Assistant Commissioner, you mentioned earlier that, of course, we're all encouraging people to pay online, no? And that's via the EFPS, is that correct?
Electronic filing and payment system, yes po.
That's the, and then I understand the EBIR is the one that is manual, correct?
The EBIR can be filed through EBIR. It can be paid manual over the counter
Yes.
or electronic then. So either it can be paid electronically or it can also be paid manually.
To date, how many of your 5.7 million taxpayers paid electronically? And how many pay manually?
Yes po. For a payment, as of January to September 2022, we do have a total online payment or online filed returns of 19,925,000 and doing the e-filing we have a total of 2,047,000 for e-filers. And for e-payment, percentage of e-payment over our total collection comprises 83%.
So 83% are now e-payments.
Yes, Chair, Mr. Chair.
And then the balance will be manual
Manual
filing.
payment.
Okay.
Opo.
All right. But for those who want to avail the manual filing, under the bill, they can now go to any of the AEBs. And that's something that the BIR supports also.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yep, of course, but I'm with you in terms of pushing with more
for,
e-payments, no?
Except for
Except for the, you mentioned
the
earlier.
what been mentioned by
Yeah.
Sir Larry.
Okay, the estate and donors tax, no?
Yes.
All right. All right, so I have a few more questions for the BIR, but we'll ask our stakeholders and experts on their opinion on the bill, and then we'll go back to the BIR later on. We'll start with Attorney Dilawan of TMAP for their comments, and then you can also, Attorney, join in the discussion
Yes, sir.
earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. Thank you for inviting the Tax Management Association of the Philippines and also our firm Dubaladan and Associates to this very important hearing. By the way, many of those towards my right are also members of TMAP. In fact, the person on my left is past president also of TMAP, Ms. Malulim. TMAP had already provided its comments during the hearing of this bill at the House of Representatives and also, in fact, with the Senate and with the DOF. So, except for our suggestion that the timing for the payment of the VAT should follow the receipt instead of the invoices for both sales of goods and services, all our alternative suggestions were accommodated and they are now already part of the bills. In fact, we are instrumental in inserting the provision on sales returns and allowances for services. In that regard, we have no further comments and we would like to express our full support to the bills. But we reiterate though that if possible for VAT remittance purposes for both sales of goods and services, the same should be reckoned from collection instead of upon issuance of billing. It would still be uniform for both goods and services, but our suggestion is that the VAT should become due upon collection instead of upon the issuance of the billing. And that's all. We can participate, however, in clarification of some of the issues later. Thank you.
Thank you. Attorney Dilawan, I just want to get your opinion on particularly on the classification. No? I think that is a topic that actually all of our
Yeah.
resource person suggested through their position paper. But do you suggest that we should limit only to large, medium, or we should go all the way to the end of the spectrum?
I think we can add, other than medium and large, we can add another layer, a first layer, the smallest taxpayers. And the reason there is really to simplify their compliance requirement. Maybe one payment, one filing for a year would do, rather than the current practice for everybody files, for all taxpayers file on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, and annual basis. Maybe for our smallest taxpayers, we can simplify tax filing for easy compliance.
Well, right now there's no definition of micro. Tama? There's
Right.
So if you are a micro, I don't even know kung micro is do they usually incorporate or are they single proprietor? What are they?
I would assume that these micro taxpayers are the individuals, sole proprietors. Those that are incorporated would somehow fall under medium. But there could still be incorporated taxpayers, which are also very, very small.
Yeah. How do you define the attorney? How will you define a micro and a small? What gross sales do they hit? Just out of your experience. I don't
I
even know
think
if you have clients of micro normally. What,
I don't have the
3 million?
what would be, but that would be, I think, 3 million in terms of gross receipts would be
Because I was talking to my team, I sari stores will probably earn what, 100,000 a month? Wala.
baka wala
this
pa
time.
yung iba. Yung iba probably meron, but
Yeah,
for some,
depending, I
wala.
think, no? But I think a typical sari store will fluctuate between what, 50,000 to
Right.
100,000.
100,000.
So we're talking about a gross sale of 1 million a year, more or less for micro.
About that amount, probably,
Yeah.
Your Honor. Yeah.
And then if that is their gross sale, so they can they are they even registered, those type of
Well, supposedly they should be registered, but I don't think many of them are registered. But maybe if we really simplify the filing, say, like the payment of local tax, which is just done at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year, they could probably register with our tax authorities and comply with their tax obligations. At least you can collect something from them rather than collecting nothing.
Yeah, my experience with the local government is much more efficient in terms of detecting the micro, because that's their constituent. And typically, local government, they have yung tax mapper. I'm sure you know that, no? Yung talagang physically they go out. The BIR, I don't think has that, no? On the local level, no? But the local governments typically have that. Like in Valenzuela, we have that, no? Talagang they go house to house to check if merong business permit.
Actually, the BIR has also the tax mapping program or policy.
But they
But I don't know if they are able to reach
Yeah.
the lowest or
Yeah.
the smallest taxpayers. Yeah.
From my experience in Valenzuela, they normally hit the bigger ones. But in micro talaga, we're talking about sari-sari store, vendors. No, most local governments have that. And in most local governments will have a very minimum registration fee, 10 pesos, 20 pesos for micro, talagang micro, no? Businesses. My point of the matter, Attorney, do you think that the micro businesses should be left to the local governments instead of the national belaboring the micro businesses? Because micro businesses, they're quite
Well,
small.
perhaps there should be an agreement between the BIR and the local government to make the local government as their collecting agent for purpose of complying with their tax obligations. But I believe the local tax obligation is different from the obligation to the national government. Perhaps for purposes of collection, maybe yeah, for purpose of classification also, if we classify those smallest taxpayers and let the local government collect the taxes due from them, that could also be possible. Yeah.
Because if they are earning, assuming lang, earning 1 million a year, what do they pay? The 8%?
Yeah, supposedly. Yeah.
Supposedly the 8%, if they are registered. If they
Yes.
are registered. That's why I would request from the BIR data on that last 10%, no, on the small and micro. How many of the small and micro actually pay income tax to the BIR, no? Both individual and corporate. I just want to see in the pie, no, of that 60, 30, and 10, how much are those, how much are registered and how much are actually paying from the small and micro businesses, no? Because there's a school of thought that since the local governments are much more active, you know, with the micro businesses because those are their constituents, we can just leave the micro to the local governments, no? But we have to define it first, no? What do you mean by micro? No? Are they earning a sales of 1 million, 2 million, or 3 million? Because there's no universal definition, at least in our country, no? I think the only definition is the BMBE law, but asset-based rin siya, eh. No, it's also asset-based, no? So we need to agree first. How do you define micro in terms of tax collecting purposes? Because the tax collecting purposes, whether local or national, ano siya sales based revenue based, no? So we need to seek the guidance of our experts, no? So that's another school of thought that we are playing around with, no? So
Although I believe the sales should still be the basis actually for classifying taxpayers into small, medium, or large. I think that's the more practical way of making the classification. There are others because there are also small taxpayers that also pay big amount of taxes. But I think it's still the more logical reference is are the sales, the revenues.
thank you, Attorney, for your contribution. I know that you've been part of this law for a long time already. I was reading the transcript since the 18th Congress, so TMAP was a very important contributor to this law. But feel free to continue to, I know through the discussion, you will have other ideas. Feel free to share it with us. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. Attorney Lim, of PwC.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone, and Merry Christmas. Well, in line with, we generally support the ease of paying taxes bills, no, because this is in line with the ease of doing business law and the tax reform laws that were previously passed, and will ease the tax administration system and make it simple and encourage tax compliance. But we have some comments. So in limiting the obligation to withhold expanded withholding tax to medium and large taxpayers, we support that. However, as the criteria for which taxpayers would fall under the medium and large should be defined, we suggest that it should be provided under the law, because if we leave it to the administration or administrative body or the executive, they may just set lower parameters and would defeat the very purpose of ease of compliance. Now, I think what we need to look into and evaluate further is how do we define a medium and large taxpayer, because currently, as was mentioned already, what we have right now is just reference, like for example, for the Magna Carta for MSME, which is based on assets. So, and I agree with Fulvio saying that, sales or maybe the better parameter, but we will need to evaluate and perhaps we'll give our suggestions later on. We'll take a look into that. On the proposed amendments on the filing and payment of internal revenue taxes, I think we are very supportive of the Senate's approach because it expressly added electronic and payment avenues, which is more consistent with the ease of easing the taxpayers' compliance. And that would also do away with the taxpayer being imposed a surcharge if you file at the wrong venue. And in line with that, we also suggest that the provision in the tax code wherein there is a surcharge if you file it at the wrong venue should be deleted. On the standardizing the tax basis and timing for withholding tax, which is upon payment now, which is upon payment under the proposed Senate bill, and the VAT, it will simplify compliance in general. However, we also echo the concern insofar as basing the VAT on the invoice, meaning that the moment that you issue the invoice, there will already be VAT obligation because the seller is allowed to pass on the VAT to the taxpayer. But then, of course, in terms of if it's based on invoice, that the seller has not received yet the payment but already be liable for VAT. And there will be situations, say for bad debts, you already paid the VAT, but you're not able to even collect what you sold. And in fact, when you write off that receivable, there are a number of conditions that you need to comply with before you are allowed to claim that as a deduction. And even if you are allowed to claim it as a deduction, you're only able to recoup 25% because that's the tax rate, no, for income tax. So perhaps something that can be looked into is on the payment rather than issuance of the invoice. And this will also harmonize insofar as withholding tax is concerned, because in the proposal of the Senate, it's based on payment. And that's a very welcome development, because normally during tax assessments or tax audits, it really becomes an issue, because currently under the regulations, it's based on paid, payable, or accrued, whichever comes first. And normally there is a disconnect between the buyer and the seller insofar as recognition of that expense or sale is concerned.
Attorney, so is that that's in the Senate version? Do you agree with that? Because that
yes,
there's
the
at least
payment.
3 ways,
Yes,
diba? So
correct, correct.
we just our team suggested we should just focus on one,
Yes.
which is upon payment.
Payment,
Yeah.
yes, yes. We support that, sir, because based on experience, it's really an issue, no, during audit, especially the accrual portion, that you need to already make that withholding, and then on the part of the, especially if as a small taxpayer, the taxpayer has not yet reported because it's adopting a cash basis, but then the buyer is adopting an accrual basis of accounting. So when there is an audit and you make a comparison, third-party information, then it becomes an issue.
In practice, what happens when there's a different methodology that's being used?
Okay, so for one, like for example, if it's because now it's accrued, paid, payable, whichever comes first. So if you do not make that accrual or withholding for that accrual, then that expense is being disallowed as a deduction. No, unless you, of course, you prove that there was subsequent payment, but then of course there's also increments. And as I was mentioning, especially if you're adopting different accounting methods, the other one is accrual, the other one is cash. So definitely there will be a disconnect in terms of reporting of the income.
Upon payment simplifies.
Correct,
all-
yes.
Okay.
And in line with that, let's also harmonize that with VAT. Okay. And on the frequency of payment, on the like the I think also for percentage tax, because the percentage tax, as we noted, is now also, the proposal is now also based on invoice. So probably it would still be based on gross receipts. Okay. And on the frequency of payment on from quarterly to semi-annual, perhaps that could be adopted for percentage tax, because this involves the smaller taxpayers. Okay. And on the preservation of the books of accounts, I think there is a suggestion to increase it from 3 to 5 years. We proposed that we retain the 3-year retention period in line with the statute of limitations for conducting assessments. And then there is a proposal on the lowering of surcharge to 12% under the House bill. Perhaps we can adapt that as well from 25% to 12%. And on the other measures, on the imposition of the 500 annual registration fee, we support the removal of that. I think there was a concern earlier in terms of the monitoring the taxpayer registering. The taxpayer can still register, but you don't need to impose that 500 pesos registration fee. And then on the the removal of the wrong filing, I think I've mentioned that already. And lastly, on the simplification of the registration procedures, I think it's not in the code, but perhaps we can propose a provision in line with the registration of the books of accounts, because currently the system does not allow. Initially, you would need to register first if you're a new business, whether you're big or small. It needs to be yung manual books of accounts, because before you can even register as for loose leaf or for computerized accounting system. Perhaps something that can be amended as well, or introduced in the tax code. We'll provide sir suggested provision on that.
When you say books of account, these are ito yung
Sir,
physical,
yung
no?
sales, the cash receipts books, cash disbursements book, journal,
But these are
ledger.
the physical.
The physical, yes. But when you register po kasi as a taxpayer, when you register with the BIR, so you would need to register your books. But initially, there is no, I think in terms of the implementation, you cannot right away be registered as, for loose leaf or for computerized accounting system. You need first to do manual registration of your books before. Then after that, when you're already operating, that's the time that you file for loose leaf or computerized accounting system.
The computerized accounting system is accepted siya. It's
Yes,
accepted.
po, yes, but not at the onset when you make that registration. Kasi there's a process as well. But perhaps there's something that we can do about it. No.
Why not? Why not the computerized from the onset?
Yun, hindi, the way we understand it, sir, there's no the BIR, perhaps the BIR can correct me though, but upon registration, there's no facility or it's not allowed. It's more of, it's manual first before you do computerized accounting system or adopt a loose leaf registration of your books.
Okay. But I think, I mean, in the spirit of digitalization, I
Yes,
think we
yes.
should already allow digital
Yes, from the start.
from
Maybe
the start.
you can allow the registration of computerized accounting system at the onset and then do a post checking after the registration. Because rather than you put first and then when there's an audit, they would like to see in that manual whether you're large manual books of accounts that all the entries, even you already have it in your computer.
Okay.
Because if you're not registered for CAS or for
This
loose leaf.
this maintain books of accounts for 3 or 5 years. These are physical books rin, ba?
But not necessarily po. Three, that would be physical books and all the records as well, even if you're a computerized accounting system.
What do you maintain, the physical
Yes
of
po,
accounts
if you're
or-
registered as
or
for
digital
physical.
is allowed?
Yeah, digital is allowed if you're registered.
Okay.
But if you're manual books of accounts, then you need to keep that. But we suggest that in terms of preservation, should be aligned with the prescriptive period of 3 years.
Okay. I would assume businesses now are going digital.
Yes,
also
yes.
with their
Especially
accounting
during the
system.
pandemic, people are more online and
And a lot of the accounting system now I saw are cloud-based.
correct,
They can
correct.
do
Yeah.
you don't
Yes.
need to hire a full-time accountant to keep your books. Everything is done
Yes.
via cloud. No?
Because that
Even the
would-
smallest businesses.
Totoo po, sir. So that would really ease yung compliance as well. Because there's also penalty. If, for example, you do not fill in that books of accounts, even if you have it in your computer. Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Attorney Lim. We call on Attorney Gan of RSM.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Chair, and same with the other previous participants and resource speakers. We very much welcome the ease of paying taxes bill. So we have previously submitted our comments. So I will discuss the key points, and I would not repeat what has previously been mentioned already by Attorney Balu and Attorney Dawilan. So I think first, with regards to the invoicing requirements. So one of the common comments we get from clients as well as investors into the Philippines is that our invoice and official receipts requires too much information. It takes a lot of effort to to issue one, and as currently the threshold is around 100, so it takes a lot of time to issue one, and the penalty for failure to comply with certain information requirements is quite severe. It can result in the disallowance of the expense, or it can result in the disallowance of the input VAT claim. So just an example, you purchase something, it's worth 1,000 pesos, it's a valid business expense, you paid for it, But for some reason, when the person issuing the OR forgot to put in the business style, then because of that, the input VAT may be disallowed. In the event of an audit, the expense may also be disallowed. So what we would suggest is if we can reduce the number of information that needs to be contained in an invoice or an OR to only those that are absolutely required, also for tax administration. So one of them that we would suggest to exclude would be business style. Currently, in the draft bills, both Senate and House, there's already the removal of business style under Section 237. So that's the general requirement to issue invoice. But then for VAT side, there is one separate section which provides for the information that should be contained in the invoice or receipt, and that is Section 113B. So currently, Section 113B still retains the requirement to have business style indicated. So one of the things that we would recommend is to exclude the business style. And then the other point, and this is very relevant to companies that are claiming VAT refund, is that if we would look at Section 113B for companies that has zero-rated sales, there's this requirement that the zero-rated should be written prominently. But on the other hand, for exempt sales, there's no such corresponding requirement. So it leads to a lot of technicalities when a refund is claimed. Because, Mr. Chair, if you see an OR or an invoice, the one that's printed already and accredited, approved by the BIR, there is this table at the side where it's listed VATable, VAT exempt, and zero rated. And companies would typically fill that up. But in a refund application, because the tax code requires that it should be prominently written, there are jurisprudence which states that there should be a separate stamp or indication in big font in the receipt or invoice that it is zero rated. And because of that, once the refund claim is filed, it can lead to disallowance. So considering that the current requirement already provides for an indication of zero rated sales, there's the requirement to prominently indicate separately the zero rated, we suggest that it should be excluded. So that's with regards to the invoicing. The other one is on the withholding tax. And I agree with Attorney Lim that the standardization to payment is something that's very much welcome because it has in the past led to a lot of uh, assessments from the BIR, even if the taxpayer really wants to comply, but it's just so difficult to comply with the accrual requirement. But in addition to that, we would like to suggest that because the withholding tax liability, that's on the one paying. The one subjected to withholding, the one where the 1% or 2% was deducted, that company or that taxpayer will now claim a tax credit. So we suggest, and one of the common procedures of the BIR is that they would look at the tax credits during the year and compare it against the revenue realized or recognized during the year. So if we are proposing to change it to payment, then the tax I may receive, for example, it's 2022, I recognize revenue of 1,000. But payment was only made next year. So under the proposed amendments, I would only be subjected to withholding tax next year. So the tax credit will be issued 2023, but revenue is recognized 2022. One of the common procedures for audit is that the BI will match the tax credit against the revenue declared. In this particular case, there would be a mismatch. So what we suggest is there should also be a corresponding amendment to that section on allowing tax credit that taxpayers can claim it when upon payment from the client, so that it would match the withholding and the crediting will match on the same period. And then the other point is we have Section 34 of the tax code, Section 34K, which says that an expense will only be allowed as a deduction if only the corresponding withholding tax has been paid. So if we are going to change the timing of withholding to payment, it will not anymore correspond to the claiming of the expense. So I may have claimed the expense this 2022, but I may have paid in 2023 or 2024. But under Section 34K, it says that I can only claim the expense in 2022 if I withhold or remitted the withholding taxes. So I think Section 34K may also need to be revisited because of that change in the timing of withholding. And then with regards to the computerized accounting system, as the government and the private sector is driving towards digitalization, maybe because right now for computerized accounting system, companies would need to apply separately. And then the BR will evaluate the completeness of the documents, etc. So maybe one way to fast track digitalization is similar to the accreditation of POS suppliers. Maybe the BIR can also accredit certain computerized accounting system providers so that there are off-the-shelf system. It can be a subscription, cloud-based, or on-premise license that companies can buy and pre-accredited already by the BIR, and they can use that so that they do away with having to start with manual writing of the columnar books. Yeah.
So, attorney, what you were saying is to pre-accredit exist
Providers.
providers or
Yes, or
existing
software, yes.
systems already. Okay.
Because currently POS systems, they are accredited by the BIR. So maybe they can also expand that and extend that to computerized accounting systems.
Okay.
Okay, so that is all, Mr. Chair.
Attorney, I'll just go back to you mentioned earlier the number of information in the invoice or receipts. There's also in the position paper, I also read that a lot of these stakeholders supports removal of that business style. So what do you think should be included in the invoice or receipts? And second, hindi pa computerized na yung mga invoice and receipts. Some establishments, it's computerized eh.
Yes.
When you request, it's already. I know what you're saying. Sometimes they write. It's actually it's not consistent. No, some of the establishment they give you a printed official receipt. Some they have to write it. No. Number one is what information should be included in the receipts or invoice.
Okay.
And then second, shouldn't we just do all digital invoice so that it's easier? I know what you're saying. Nakita ko they write a lot of information.
Yes. I think with regards the information that should be contained in the invoice or receipt, there's a need also to balance the requirements for tax administration. So for example, and that is mainly to avoid practices of issuing illegal or spurious receipts, or for businesses to buy receipts without really incurring the expense. So certain basic information like the name of the taxpayer, the tax identification number, the date of the transaction, the nature of the transaction, those should still be clearly indicated. But on the other hand, certain information that may not necessarily be relevant or doesn't really aid with tax administration, such as the business style, to be specific. These are things that can be removed because you're correct that a lot of the invoices and receipts, they are now computer issued electronically. But the challenge is sometimes certain companies do not have business style. And in fact, business style has been a contentious issue for quite some time. Along the tax advisors and companies, we really, at one point in time, we don't know what business style is. Is it that the nature of your operations or the type of industry you have? Or is it the trade name, for example? So eventually, the BIR did issue a circular and said it is the trade name or business name in your DTI or in your SEC registration. But beyond that, there are questions of uh, there are companies that do not have, and a lot of our invoices and receipts, unfortunately, are still manually issued. So the quality of the information there depends on the one requesting for it, which sometimes may not be knowledgeable of the requirements, and also the cashier that issues it, which sometimes they also try to simplify because of the volume of transactions.
And you suggest to already specify that in the law?
I think we can, because right now it's required.
I mean, at least the minimum or the, not minimum, but the maximum
Yeah, so
information.
yes. Right now, the law has an enumeration. So I would suggest that we can exclude, or the law can in fact specify only this information, because uh, uh, otherwise, additional requirements can be added later on. And an example of that would be the senior citizens and PWD numbers.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Attorney. Call on Attorney Azores of,
Okay. I think we have the same.
you
we're
guys
from
are
the same
colleagues?
firm,
All right.
yes.
So call on Attorney Aznar.
Hello, good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. So, thank you for inviting PNA Grand Thornton for this Senate very important public hearing. So, Mr. Chair, we indeed support the bills, the Senate bills, and for ease of paying taxes by the taxpayers. Actually, we have submitted our comments last November 15, and some of our comments have already been mentioned by our colleagues in this session. But just to mention some, uh, with respect to the timing of recognizing VAT, we really do support that it should be based on collections. And just to add to what have been mentioned earlier, it is also to align with still in the VAT rules. When we withhold VAT on purchase of service from non-resident entities, non-resident foreign corporations, non-resident persons, we withhold it at the time of payment. Also, in input VAT on importations, it is also based on the payment of input VAT prior to the release of goods. So these are all aligned really on the timing in with respect to collections. So we support it. Now, if that is not, or if that will not be the case in the final version, and we stick to the date of invoice, we have some comments here. Like for example, in the Senate Bill Section 14. It mentioned here that the VAT shall be at the time of issuance of the invoice. Perhaps we can make categorical mention here that it should be on the date on the face of the invoice, because some taxpayers may even also confuse that when this is the date of the invoice, but the time of issuance could be at a later date. So if we intend to use the invoice, perhaps we could categorically mention that it's on the date of the invoice. Another item here is, again, if we are going to stick to the use of the invoice, to be fair, or perhaps we believe that to be fair to the taxpayers, it should also include those that are written off receivable. So perhaps you could categorically include that in the enumeration here on sales returns, allowances, and those written off receivables to which the self-service relates to be fair to the taxpayers. Also, that with respect to the discount, perhaps also, again, if you will use the invoice, then in the future, there could also be prompt payment discounts. So this will not be collected by the seller. So we also suggest that be included categorically, that if there are prompt payment discounts, that will reduce the output VAT of the seller at the time of that granting of the discount. Then number 3, Mr. Chair, we have a comment here on the erroneous issuance of invoice. It mentioned there in our tax code that if there is an erroneous issuance of invoice for a VAT exempt by issuing VAT invoice or VAT OR, the penalty is that exempt transaction will be subjected to VAT. We believe that this could be too harsh of a penalty on the part of taxpayer by just merely mistakenly not putting the VAT zero rated or VAT exempt. But still, the nature of the transaction is really an exempt transaction or a VAT zero rated transaction by just merely forgetting to put it in the proper column or proper row. Perhaps the penalty could be too harsh. Or perhaps it could be just an administrative penalty. Perhaps this could be looked into in the amendment of the or in the finalization of the bills. Also, another point, Mr. Chair, in the context of aligning the timing to receipts or to the sales, we also noted that on the percentage tax on international carrier, right now the determination of the gross revenue of the international air carrier is the gross Philippine billings, which is based on a certain computation. There is this there is this average net fare multiplied by the number of passengers flown, or multiplied by passengers flown in each category of the tickets, in the net fare of the tickets sold. So perhaps to simplify this, we can just mention that it is based on the sold tickets of the passengers flown. But perhaps this could also be looked into because there could be a complicated computation in that determination of gross Philippine billings. The gross Philippine billings, Mr. Chair, is provided in the Revenue Regulations 15-02. Perhaps it could be related to Section 23 of the Tax Code. Just to simplify the determination of gross Philippine billings. Another item, Mr. Chair, is on the transfer of registration, which is in the SBN Section 28. We just like to suggest to perhaps include a provision of providing a specific time, like 10 days, wherein the BIR should process and approve the request. And in case of inaction, just in case that if there's an inaction, that it will be automatically approved after the lapse of 10 days, so that to facilitate the transfer of registration of our taxpayers, also the ones that are transferring from one RDO to another, to support their mobility, to be more mobile for the taxpayers' businesses. And then on Section 29, Mr. Chair of SBN, there is this, as mentioned earlier, now there's this 100 peso threshold for issuance of invoice. Yeah, we heard also the concern of our BIR colleagues, no? But perhaps we can again revisit this 100 peso threshold. This could be years ago. And there have been a lot of changes already, the rising prices, the fuel prices, as we know, no? And we are talking about retailers. There are perhaps retailers who are just earning 1% of this 100 peso, 15%, I mean, 10 to 15% of this 100 peso threshold. And how much is the cost of the invoice for printing? Could be 4 peso for every 100 peso, or 1% of the 100 peso threshold could be the cost of printing one invoice or one OR, no? So perhaps we can look again on this amount. Of course, the amount, we don't have the figure, no, but perhaps we can increase the 100 peso threshold. And next item here.
Attorney, before we
Yes, sir.
move to the next item, what do you suggest on the amount?
Honorable Mr. Chair, we don't have no a figure for that, but we are aware in the House Bill version that is 500 peso, no, or perhaps it could be affected by consumer price index, perhaps, but we don't have the statistics to really come up with a figure. Yeah, but we are supporting that this should be increased, the 100 peso threshold.
Go ahead, Attorney.
Yes. And then another item, Mr. Chair. Yeah, on the business style, it was already mentioned by Attorney Gan. And then I think for ease of administration, that's all about it for our comments. The other portion here, I think, is more on substance in our comment in the letter, substance of the law. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Thank you. We call on Attorney Lopez of Deloitte.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. For Deloitte, we express our support, no, for the legislation for the ease of tax compliance. These bills are not only important, but we consider as necessary, no, as this will simplify compliance of our taxpayers and in the view of efficiency of tax administration, because with the ease of doing business, because this will contribute to ease of doing business, ultimately promoting foreign investments into the Philippines. Because as we have seen, part of our service, we do assist foreigner, alien employees who are coming into the Philippines. They are being sent here for assignment, no, for less than a year. And these alien employees are being required to pay income taxes even if they would stay in the Philippines for less than a year. So by the time before the end of the year, these alien employees have already left the Philippines, and usually their assignment here in the Philippines are not being. There are instances that since short term, their assignment their salaries are not being charged to the local employer, the host company, or not being subjected to the compensation withholding. But as part of the good corporate governance policies of their multinational employers, the employers themselves would require these alien employees to be compliant, to file their income tax return. So with our process now, income tax return of individuals are allowed to be filed only after the close of the calendar year. So by that is the window between January to April 15 of the following year. And by the time that the individual employees are filing, the alien employees would file their annual ITR. They have already left the Philippines. No. With the change that is being proposed by the Senate bill, that they will now be allowed to file remotely, no, to pay and file their income tax remotely. I think that would solve the problem, because this causes frustration to the alien employees who would like to comply, because our current process now is that our ITR, annual ITR, should be filed using a wet ink signature, no? Although there are now innovations that e-payment and e-filing would now be allowed, but we have seen several instances for alien employees who would just like to be able to comply and pay their ITR, that for them it's too much hassle, it's too much bother. They are already complying, but they could not file. They even have to the extent of issuing an SPA, notarized apostille from their foreign country, just to be able to authorize somebody here in the Philippines to sign the tax return and pay the tax thereon. So with this innovation, we indeed very much supportive of allowing taxes to be paid even remotely. Okay. And then another comment that we have is as regards which has been earlier mentioned by my colleagues here, is that regarding the recognition, the basis for recognition of the value-added tax. So we fully support the changing of the basis of the source document for the recognition of the VAT, and there should no longer be distinction between sale of goods and sale of services, because actually this distinction on recognition, whether invoice or official receipt, have caused disallowance of input VAT claim of a particular taxpayer. Just to give you an example, say we have this multinational company who is registered as a seller of service. So for being a seller of service, it was only authorized to issue a VAT official receipt, because it is selling service. And then in the course of valid corporate restructuring, it had to sell assets from one company to the other.
No, it had to sell its asset from one company to the other, and in the course of since these assets are used in the course of trade or business, these are vatable sale from the seller company selling its assets to the other affiliated company. So as we all know, the output VAT of the seller would be the input VAT of the purchaser company. And since the seller company is registered as a service entity, it is only having VAT official receipt. No, so when the purchase on the so when the purchaser company, affiliated company, is already claiming the input VAT on the purchase asset, it could not claim the input VAT because it was not issued a VAT invoice. Because according to our tax law, the VAT law, the basis for claiming input VAT should be VAT invoice. But the seller does not have a VAT invoice because it is selling service. So as again, we indeed the adoption of a uniform source basis for the recognition of VAT sale and input and output. We agree on that, and I echo the suggestions of the earlier resource speakers that it should be the VAT official receipt, no, uniform without distinction as to sale of goods or sale of service. And that's all. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. What happened to, I'm just curious, Attorney Lopez, what happened to that disallowed? How did you rectify that?
It was not rectified. They were made to pay the tax for that.
Maybe they should get Punong Bayan or PWC.
Sorry about that.
No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm just curious because that's also common feedback, you know. Even in practice, it's quite confusing, and some of the feedback, some of the resource position papers that I got, it's same feedback that they echoed. No? So that's why in line with this, we just want to simplify it, no? Yeah, so that we will not encounter confusion and also problems like that. We call on Chemonics, represented by Mr. Armonit.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Mr. Chair, and good morning to officers of the BIR and the Department of Finance, and to fellow people from the private sector. First of all, Mr. Chair, thank you very much for allowing independent observers such as myself to attend and contribute to this discussion, and for holding open discussions on this, what I consider to be important legislation. I think that in discussing the ease of paying taxes bill, I think it's important to take a step back and recall what the objectives of the CTRP is, because this is part of, I believe it's part of the government's comprehensive tax reform program. One such objective is closing the tax gap. Closing the tax gap by redistributing the tax burden. Redistributing in such a way that you lessen the burden on who were then highly taxed sectors or groups, and apply and allow more collections from those that were considered lightly taxed or those that had more capability to pay. So I think also that this is perhaps the last piece in the puzzle, or one of the last pieces in the puzzle, to allow the government to meet these objectives, which is modernizing the BIR in both practice and systems. So the bill has a number of laudable sections, I would say, and part of these are preserving the current value of the VAT threshold, et cetera, and really promoting the use of electronic transactions, et cetera. And at the beginning, I was going to say, but I've also heard from the BIR, and I think it's very important. But I was going to say that one of the big steps forward in introducing these kinds of changes are things like removing PSU file, but I will explain in a while. The PSU file practice, advancing taxpayer segmentation, specifically in organizing. I do agree that that organizing a medium taxpayers is enough because the residual will mean that the BIR, the rest of the BIR will be focused on also the small and micro as a consequence of organizing medium taxpayers. There are a few concepts that I would like to bring to bear. If I may, at this point, hearing some of the discussions that have been given. First of all, before I do that, I would like to say, after hearing the BIR, I would like to say that it is of utmost importance to consider the capability of the tax administration to implement these kinds of changes. So when they do say that immediate removal of, for example, PSU file practice could be detrimental, especially in the short run, I think it is worth really every penny, so to speak, to listen to BIR and to consider those remarks from them. Having said that, I still do believe that it is an important objective to meet because at the end of the day, it will preserve both the efficiency of the BIR as well as increase welfare of taxpayers. I think that the way the current tax law is written at the moment, there is still some room, excuse me, there is some room to raise both objectives, increasing the efficiency of BIR on the one hand and increasing taxpayer welfare on the other. It's not yet a zero-sum game, in my humble opinion. So rather than shooting down at this point the PSU file practice, this is just one of them. I probably would like to restate that it is a goal that has to be met from my point of view, that ought to be met in the future, perhaps with timelines given, perhaps, because there are solutions that have been introduced by other tax administrations that are capable of. It is a good practice, and other tax administrations around the world have been able to implement this by introducing perhaps improvements in procedures and systems to monitor payments and filing to be able to match. So perhaps until such time, maybe a provision in the law could specify a condition where the BIR has to, adopt these kinds of procedures and systems, and then implement PSU file. Now, I think it's important to have to separate the acts of payment from filing because it will, at the end of the day, benefit both taxpayer and tax administration efficiency. That's one. On taxpayer segmentation, as I had mentioned, I do believe that the most efficient way forward would be to specify the organization of a medium taxpayers unit, an MTU. But however, I do also believe that a lot of the details in setting up the MTU criteria, et cetera, can be left to regulation, so that you do not inadvertently, hamper the efficiency of BIR going forward. There are safeguards that can be introduced, and I believe that these safeguards to counterbalance, so to speak, can be introduced in legislation that you had mentioned earlier, such as the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. So I do believe, if I may just say that that's another piece of legislation that is very important for advancing the modernization of tax admin in the Philippines. on classification, I do believe, and I believe that this should be placed in regulation. A classification of medium taxpayers. The most important, I agree with a few of the resource people that first and foremost, it's gross sales. It's different from the way the SEC and the DTI classify their businesses, because this is for tax purposes, and the most important would be gross sales. Um, Let me just step back a bit. The reason I believe that a lot of the details should be left in regulations rather than in the law is to prevent situations such as one cited earlier by the gentleman to my right on the 100 peso threshold, for example. You don't want to get caught, implementing something that's outdated already. So perhaps things like these can be left in regulation, or safeguards such as adjusting periodically based on criteria such as inflation rate, etc., may be introduced. No. Finally, I would also like to stress at this point that, if I may, I do believe, just like the way the large taxpayers are classified, and just to reiterate, there is classification of large taxpayers in the tax code, but it's further elaborated in revenue regulations. Just the way the large taxpayers are classified in national scope, I believe that medium taxpayers should be classified in a similar way, which is national and not specific to regions. Just to cite some statistics, and if they are outdated at this point, I would appreciate being corrected by the BIR. No? But you have 2,600 large taxpayers that they account for about 65% of total collections. You have about 1 million registered corporations, then about, I think, 3 million single proprietors. I do believe that those are the numbers that are written in the annual report of the BIR. Having said that, it's easy to see how given 2,600 taxpayers, large taxpayers responsible for upwards of 90%, perhaps 95% or even higher of total collections, and the rest, which number in about 4 million taxpayers, account for less than 5% perhaps of total collections. And just to stress, a one-size-fits-all approach to the entire taxpayer population does not work. Will not work, especially for the smaller taxpayers. Segmenting is one way, is one step, very big step forward in making sure that the tax admin is able to apply rules specific to larger taxpayers, large and some medium, large, medium ones, and perhaps enact easier rules for the rest of the taxpayer population, who are actually the bulk of the taxpayers. So much as the BIR at this point has the TAMP, which is very important as well for the revenue regions, I do believe that a classification for medium taxpayers should be done at the national level to maintain efficiency. That's all for now, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Joseph, Mr. Armovit, you mentioned earlier a feature of the bill is to redistribute the burden or redistribute the requirements from smaller taxpayers to the bigger ones. No? That's how I understand it. I think the key here is the segmentation or the classification, but that's actually a challenge because there's no, based on sales, there's no universal formula, or there's no local formula that that is being used. So I ask everyone to suggest, and do you have any, based on your practice and also from international best practices, what segmentation or what seals do you see as a appropriate segmentation for each for each segment?
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair. When I say usually other countries will practice perhaps a simplified way of classifying taxpayers from large to medium to small. And this would mostly consist of gross sales, turnover, and taxable and amount of taxes paid. However, it's always a balance between the two. Gross sales being the more important one. As to specific numbers, that would really be a policy decision by the government. It has to be based on the level of economic development, so to speak, in a country. Again, this should be changing in time because the structure of the economy will change in time, and values will change in time as well because of inflation. So values, I think, ideally should be left in revenue regulations. However, again, if I may reiterate, that the most important should be gross sales, and to a certain degree, maybe with less weight, amount of taxes paid.
Okay. Yeah. In the House version, it's actually left to the administration to determine that. There are some suggestion to we should already predetermine it in the law, but I do agree that the values change and conditions also change. So I think it's better to leave it to the administration to determine it. No? But we have to mandate the creation. No? It may be some form of structure, but I think so that we will not amend the law every time there are conditions or economic conditions are changing. We can leave that to the DOF and the BIR to determine. That's in the House version. And so far as the PSU file, in the Senate version we maintain that. In the House version, I think they removed that. No? Yeah, they removed that. So the BIR also mentioned that we should maintain it. No? And in your experience, how many taxpayers avail this this pay as you file concept? Everyone? Correct.
Mr. Chair,
Do you recognize the presence of Senator Sito? Yes, go ahead.
if I may, Mr. Chair, the current wording of the bills, in fact, both bills, provides that a phraseology where it says that it's during the filing, which already addresses the concern on payment payment as you file. I think it's already the remarks here as provided in the column. It says that it addresses that concern. The phraseology during the filing, I think already addresses that.
All right.
Mr. Chair, if I also
go ahead.
may would comment, I would like to pick up on the issue that was raised earlier on the classification of taxpayers. In fact, the Secretary of Finance during one of our conversations has already given the instructions or to explore increasing the number of large taxpayers that are being handled by our present large taxpayer services. noting that there are only around 2,300 of them, and or 26 as of the moment, and these companies contribute to around 60 to 70% of the total BIR goal. So he mentioned about exploring how we can already increase the number of large taxpayers in order to increase the take up on of taxes on these taxpayers. So it's a welcome development that we take up in the discussion on how we can improve the selection of large and medium taxpayers in order to in fact increase our tax base and number of taxpayers that will be contributing to that the main pie of taxes. So we will be closely coordinating with the committee on the phraseology on how to provide a provision whereby we can achieve that objective, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Before I continue, Senator Sito, any opening statement? Being a taxpayer yourself, both employed and business.
Anyway, good morning, Mr. Chair, and to all the resource persons. Anyway, being former chief executives, just like the chair, one of the more important, one of the the priority that we did, no, was really to make it easier for taxpayers, more convenient, para mas maging efficient din, no? And I think automation and computerization is a very important and integral part in achieving this purpose. Of course, yung ease of doing business, kasama na rin po yung itong this bill that is being deliberated, no? That's why rest assured, Mr. Chair, that given our experience in improving and making it more convenient for taxpayers, mas magiging ano rin, we can also expect, no, that we will have better returns, no, because the transparency and the convenience will be very helpful, very important in encouraging everybody to pay what is due. So I'm just here to of course listen to the resource persons while meron tayong CA, ongoing CA, but of course I always support the chair, who is my former almost my sabay kami halos nag-mayor, and yung the success that we had as chief executives is can be attributed to our more efficient and automation, no? Because it made it more convenient for taxpayers. So yung transparency is very important. Kaya I think we have siguro nag-threefold tayo or even times 4, nag-quadruple yung aming revenues during our times, during the times or stints as chief executives. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Sito. Little trivia, when Senator Sito was the mayor of San Juan was the richest city in the whole Philippines. Then, nag-city ka na. From municipality to city. Yeah. And because on a per capita basis, no? Because it's a small municipality that became a city, and it was collecting efficiently. And it's also located in the heart of Metro Manila. No? So if you compute it on a per capita basis nationwide, it's actually the richest municipality / city nationwide. So, and that's also because of automation and efficiency in terms of tax collection. All right. So thank you, Mr. Amovit, for your comments. And the League of Cities is here. No, sorry, I was supposed to call you earlier, but there's a provision there to remove the LGUs. Any comments to that? By practice, I know we don't in Valenzuela. We don't do it. No, but I don't know if other LGUs
Yes,
collect in behalf of the BIR.
yes. First, good morning, Mr. Chair. Um, on behalf of the League of Cities of the Philippines, we would like to manifest that we overall support the Ease of Paying Taxes Act. On the inquiry of whether to remove or not to remove the local treasurer, I'm afraid it has not been practiced uniformly throughout the 147 cities as far as our database is concerned. Uh, Pardon my voice, Mr. Chair. And also, another reason why the LCP manifest its support, because it is our opinion that when we have an improved tax administration, therefore, the cities can also attract more businesses, and local businesses would also mean more revenue for the local governments as well. If we can just input, uh, we would like to note on the classification of taxpayers. We would like to maintain that micro and small businesses should be under the local. If I can share, yesterday in the sir, with the committee of Congress, there was a small discussion on whether what amount should be subjected to the status of taxation. Now this is an informal amendments. It's yet to be reflected in the substitute bill, but the range approved yesterday would be around 500,000 to 2 million pesos for micro to small businesses, because if we were going to divide those amounts in 30 days, that's roughly below 100,000 pesos. Now it is best to be under the local government, because again, with regard to sari-sari stores, to I may say Yossi vendors, they move around the area, and they do not have same location all the time. In fact, uh, they also have to seek, I do not know if the proper term is collection fee, but they do seek permission from, let's say, the chairman, from where the stalls will be located. So it is the plea of the LCP for the micro to small to be under the jurisdiction of the local governments. And lastly, it is our comment also that we manifest that the CPI should be updated. It is, upon checking, the PSA website updates their CPI on a monthly basis. So may we suggest if that can also be adopted in this bill, if it can be done, that it should be monthly updated. That would be all. But again, Mr. Chair, I know I've made a lot of comments, but again, this is subject to the approval of our National Executive Board, and the Secretariat would then recommend that this bill be supported by the LCP National Executive Board. That would be all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you to LCP. We're also joined by Attorney Meneses of SM. Sir, any comments po?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Most of the resource persons have already mentioned a lot of the items that we indicated in our position paper last November 12. But we just want to note that we submitted an additional proposed amendment to a provision in the documentary stamp tax for leasing in recognition of the fact that there is a variable element in respect of leasing at this time, which was not present before. So some lessors will now charge lease rates based on a percentage of sales. In the past, it was just based on a fixed rate per month or per year. So we added an additional recommended amendment to the provision on documentary stamp tax provision on leasing to recognize that variable element. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Some of the lease rates, I know in SM, is based on a percentage of sales.
Yes, Mr. Chair, and that's the difficulty, because if you look at the current provision for documentary stamp tax, it's based on the total lease rate
for the entire lease period. And how can you determine what would be the particular lease rate if it's based on a variable element? So that's the reason why we have suggested an amendment in terms of that particular provision on leasing.
ST will be now based on the actual gross amount, the actual percentage of sales?
Your
What's
Honor,
the proposal?
Mr. Chair, if the lease is based on a fixed rate, the traditional one, then it would still be based on the entire lease amount based on the entire lease period. If the lease is based on a variable rate, based on a percentage of sales, then the DST should be paid on a monthly basis instead of for the entire year, because you cannot determine the particular lease amount. You can only determine the particular lease amount on a monthly basis. If there will be a portion based on fixed as well as variable, then the fixed should still be based on the entire lease period, but the variable portion should be paid on a monthly basis. It just makes it equitable, considering that that particular business model was not present when that provision was drafted in 1936 or 1937.
Practice, what is it now?
By practice, you make an estimation and then you...
In estimate,
and that leads to difficulties in the long run.
there's a reconciliation point, I guess.
Difficult, sir. Because if it's going to be a 10-year lease period, when should you reconcile?
I get your point. It's that you place that in your position paper?
Yes, yes,
We'll
Mr. Chair.
consider that. Other than that, Attorney, do you have any?
We echo the same problems in
Okay.
respect of the VAT, so we don't want to burden the committee and on things that were already discussed before.
Thank you.
Mr.
Thank you.
Chair, if I may.
Yes, a sec.
The recent comment about DST, perhaps this is fitting in the, if we discuss it or take it up in the, there's that PITA or P4 that's coming up to this, to the Senate, and there is a reform on DST. Perhaps we can include this matter in that bill, Mr. Chair.
The DOF suggests that the portion of the DST, well, that's true, no? Because PIFITA deals with DSTs and other transactional taxes. So we can include that there so that we'll focus on the compliance here and then the DSTs and other transactional tasks in that bill. No?
Yeah, I wonder if SM also has made a similar comment during the hearing in Congress on P4. If not, we can perhaps take it up.
Yeah,
Well,
next
once
year
it
we'll
gets
be prioritizing PIFITA. After this, we'll be prioritizing that. Then we'll look at the land valuation, the bill also. I believe that is also here, no? In land valuation.
No.
Ano ba?
Pita lang, sir.
Ano yung isa?
Pita digital tax.
Digital tax pala, isa. Yeah. Okay, yeah. All right. Okay. Any more comments from our resource persons regarding the measure?
Mr. Chair, if I may make comments on previous points that the resource persons made. Actually, I made several notes, but I'd just like to point out perhaps on four issues. First, the reform actually that has been instituted by the DOF BIR was geared towards the issuance of invoice. Not anymore the OR. In fact, the electronic invoicing, the design, it's yeah, and it is emphasizing already the invoice, right? So, the proposal to revert back to the OR as a point of as a document of reference may not be consistent with the thrust of the administration or of the BIR, whereby we're already getting towards that one single invoice receipt. And related to that, there is the requirement of raising the amount of transaction that should be issued an invoice or an OR. That might affect the e-invoicing program because under the program, slowly it will be done in phases. The large taxpayers will be the first to implement it, and the rest of the taxpayers that will be identified by the BIR will be implementing it. And if we limit the amount of the transaction on which an OR or an invoice may be issued, that may affect the program. The BIR can elaborate on it, but I think with the electronic issuance of or invoicing system that is now being piloted and will be fully implemented perhaps next year, issuance on all amounts by the concerned taxpayers is encouraged. So if we legislate or put a provision whereby we will make a limit on the amount or a threshold on the amount, that might defeat the purpose of the invoicing program, Mr. Chair. Also, Mr. Chair, with regards to, I think we are supportive of, as I mentioned earlier, identifying medium and large taxpayers and in fact, to increase the number of taxpayers that will be contributing to the collection pie. What I have observed in the bills is that the classification, there's a part there where it says that withholding of creditable withholding taxes or the imposition of that will be limited only to the medium and large taxpayers. Citing section, I think 57B. But that section, Mr. Chair, does not only concern about the 1% and 2% withholding. There are other withholding taxes that are being enumerated there. So perhaps if we can improve the provision, the intended limitation on non-withholding or non-application of the withholding tax rules will only and application only to the medium and large taxpayers that will be identified will be limited only to that criteria whereby there is a determination of the top 20,000 taxpayers that's mandated to withhold 1% and 2%. But it should not be affecting the other withholding obligations of the taxpayers, which is other than the 1% and 2%.
The other taxpayers who are mandate other than the large taxpayers at this present.
Under the rules, Mr. Chair, taxpayers that whose transactions are identified in that section should be withholding regardless of classification. So if there's rent, there's salaries, that's part of the enumeration, Mr. Chair, apart from
I think the
1% and
concept
2%.
there is to unburden the small and medium, small and micro. That's the concept there, no? I think that's also what I'm saying earlier, the unintended consequences. Because we might also spare the small businesses from withholding for compensation. No?
Yes, Mr. Chair, because it may happen that there are large and medium taxpayers or non-large and non-medium taxpayers that are classified or notified as a top 20,000.
Yeah, I get
And
that.
they could be just the medium or the small and micro enterprises.
There's no universal definition. Eh. No? So in the notification, in the list of notification, I assume there are also some small or small companies there that are withholding agents. No? And by limiting it to only large and medium, those that are notified now will not be mandated to withhold. No, I get your point, and we'll study that. They will study that angle and just submit to us also a position paper regarding that on how to. But the objective there is to unburden the small and micro. No, that is the objective.
Yes, Mr. Chair, and perhaps the burden that are imposed on them, it's on the 1 and 2% withholding tax on purchases of services and goods. But as the BIR team is saying, there are other withholding taxes
Like
obligations.
compensation.
Yes, like compensation, and because there could be medium or there could be micro taxpayers that have more than 30 or 50 employees.
Before I
Would-
call Attorney
Yeah.
Dawilan, that's why it's important to submit to us that segmentation, no? Because I also want to see, let's say, how many small are withholding agents, no? And I think it's very efficient to withhold, for example, for compensation. No? It's not only efficient but also convenient. Um, so so that we will be guided. Give us also the segmentation and also identification on who are the withholding agents there and what do they withhold. No, so that will be guided also. Yeah, Attorney Dawilan.
Yeah, just a brief comment. If the intention really is to unburden these small taxpayers, then I think it covers all types of withholding taxes, and not only those that are subject to the 1% or 2% tax, but also all types of income payments, such as professional fees, rentals, and so on. But I think that that's limited to those creditable withholding taxes. The rule for salaries and wages should be different. The salaries and wages should always be subjected to withholding taxes because the intention there is also, as the chair said, to unburden also these employees from doing their own filing. Let's just concentrate it on the employer. But all other types of withholding taxes, I suppose if you do not belong to the medium and large, then you should not have the burden of doing all those withholding taxes every month, regardless of what type of income payment that is. Thank you.
Types of withholding taxes are there?
Actually, ang dami yan. If you will look at the
More or less.
withholding tax
Tinignan ko rin.
regulations,
I looked at the BIR website. Also, alam ko marami, but more or less.
I think the withholding tax regulations umabot sa letter, more than letter Z. Eh. So if we count that letter Z, that's 20 plus and even, baka may 30 plus na ano, types of
So
income.
regardless of the size, if you're called to notified to withhold, you have to withhold.
Yes.
So for example, as in your experience, can a small size, in the absence of a definition, can a small size company be assigned to withhold?
Technically, based on the rules, they are
But in your
supposed.
experience, meron ba? Let's say I'm just maybe a family-owned restaurant, no? It's something to that effect. Other than compensation, other than
Yeah.
compensation, the other ones.
Oh, yeah, yes, they are.
Technically pwede, no? Technically pwede, yeah.
And I think yung intention is to
Yes.
unburden these small taxpayers from doing that every month. Actually, monthly, yan eh. You file every month.
Actually, that is the intention talaga, no? To focus on those ones who can afford to have manpower to do this. But the small ones, like say family business, if you own one restaurant, no? You're a family-owned corporation, but you do, and then you're assigned to withhold. You do the same work, as compared to the big companies, no? Yeah. We can look at that angle also, attorney.
I may, and I know that the BIR is beginning to take a look at this already. I share the sentiment po of attorney in stating that there are a lot of withholding taxes and rates actually. Yeah, if I may po. I do believe po also that withholding, perhaps apart from wages, because that I do see that as very important as well. But a withholding tax, for me, from my observation, is really, if I may say, a stopgap measure, if you like. It's a way to sort of transfer the burden from the individual to a withholding agent. However, the burden that gets transferred to the withholding agent is actually maybe not commensurate, because it's actually not his tax that he's being burdened upon, if you like. No, so it's usually a stopgap in tax admins that that don't have the sophistication and the systems to cope with going after or checking compliance of a number of taxpayers. So regardless of size of the taxpayer, I do believe, but I'm not sure that if this is the venue to be introducing this. But I do believe that the government has to take a step back and look at its policy on take a fresh look at its policy on withholding taxes.
The attorney Armovit on
Sir, I'm not an attorney po. I'm just a humble economist. I suggest, well, the process is very important because at the same time that, again, a balance between burdening the tax administration and burdening taxpayers, there should be a balance, should be stricken. The process is important, but it should emanate from the BIR to take a look at its years of policy, I guess, no, in its list. First of all, its list of expanded withholding. Take a fresh look at that, and I know that they are taking a look at that. But really, to determine which ones actually help and which ones actually just burden taxpayers. So I'm sorry, I can't be more specific, because I think the proper process would be to go through it one by one, beginning with the tax admin po.
in line with that, we'll request from BIR to just submit to us for analysis purpose. In the collection of withholding tax, no, from the withholding agents, how many are from, let's say, the small companies? How many are from the big companies? Because we might be surprised that what we're getting from small companies are not as substantial, no? So we'll take a look at that also, and see, and so that we'll be guided on what recommendations we can make through the committee. No? And we'll also request from the BIR. I know there's so many different types of withholding taxes. How much are we collecting from each? I'm sure we have that, no? But we'll be surprised also. Some of them we're not collecting a substantial amount. No? So maybe it's a time to take a look at the withholding taxes that we are mandating. Maybe some of them are outdated, some of them are not useful anymore, or some of them are not substantial. Then we can just use the opportunity now to correct those. No? But we'll look at the data first. We have to look at the data. No? Right. Sec Dakila, do you have any more comments? I think you had
Perhaps one last, Mr. Chair, the issue on accrual versus cash. The resource persons were of the view that the time of withholding should be at the time of payment, but instead of at the time of accrual of expenses. But just an observation, most of the taxpayers, in fact, many of them, those that are paying the taxes, because if based on observation, it appears that those that doing cash-based accounting system, these are the small ones, and in fact, they are perhaps exempt from paying income taxes. So the accrual system of accounting applies actually to those that are large and medium taxpayers, the one that we are trying to increase the number in terms of contributing to the tax pie. So changing the rules from on withholding at the time of payment may not be consistent with that approach, whereby most of these taxpayers are actually adopting the accrual method of accounting. So there may be, I think, timing differences if we adopt the. Is it correct? If there will be timing difference if we adopt the upon payment of withhold, because most of the taxpayers they're based on accrual. So I'm not so sure where their argument is coming from.
To respond to that, Attorney Lim?
Actually, that one is just one of the consequences, no? If the other taxpayer or the seller, for example, is on cash basis, and then I'm on accrual basis, but then I am already obligated to make that withholding. But when you do the matching, basically it will not match, because this one, the seller will only be reporting it when since the seller is adopting a cash basis of accounting, then only upon payment. But on the other hand, there's already that requirement on the part of the buyer to withhold. And I think one of the issues that we normally encounter, and probably my colleagues here in practice would share, in terms of the tax audit, is on the accrued expenses, especially during year end. No, so during year end, you do your accrual, no, based on because your accrual method of accounting, and since there's that obligation already to make that withholding, and in terms of the all events test that we are saying that if there's a reasonable accuracy or estimate of that payment, then you do that. You base it on that amount. But then when the invoice comes in subsequently, it's a different amount altogether. So you need to make that adjustment. You need to make an amendment of your return subsequently. And if when you amend, if it's under withholding, then you're already subject to penalties. If it's over withholding, on the other hand, you would need to refund. And if it's just, the refund process, as we know, is a tedious process. So I think that's one of the concerns that we have, no? And we understand, of course, on the part of the BIR, because this is one of the collection items that they have during audit. It's on the accrual. But the problem is, if, for example, I don't accrue, but I already incurred that expense, and I made that the deduction of that expense subsequently when I already received the invoice. But that would be there will be an issue on out of period. Claiming of out-of-period expense in the subsequent year, and that will be disallowed as well. So I think that's one. I think for us, that's one more of the more important issues that we encounter if because it's accrued, paid, or payable. In the past, long time ago, I think it was just paid or payable. whichever comes first, at least because if it's payable, when the obligation is already legally demandable, meaning there's already that invoice, etc. But when they introduced in the regulation accrual, you know, the concern, no, became significant, no, insofar as remittance of withholding tax is the issue on withholding tax remittance is concerned, especially during audit, because you accrue the expense, but then the withholding is made subsequently, then there's also an issue because you will be a slap of penalties. So it's really a balancing act that needs to be addressed.
The reason why we propose that is, again, to simplify, and what we've heard from practitioners is also, and also taxpayers of that type of concern. No? But I do admit, I do acknowledge the comments of the DOF. So we'll study this very carefully also. Again, maybe we can also be guided on how many, can that be counted? How many availed of the accrual? How many availed of that type of, is there such data?
Yeah,
No.
because perhaps, Mr. Chair, the situation described by the resource person is an exception or not the normal situation. So I'm thinking if we're going to shift from that time of withholding at a time of payment, that could mean would that be revenue eroding on the part of the bureau?
In our analysis, it's a timing issue. It's a timing issue, no. But in terms of amount, I would assume it's the same. No, it's just when do you withhold and when do you pay. No, that's the difference. It's more or less a cash flow issue on the part of government. I think. No? So, but I would assume a payment scheme will be beneficial to the government because nabibigay na sa gobyerno as opposed to accrual. I would assume. So, in terms of cash flow, it's better for the government because we get the remittance right away. But I'll give BAR some time to analyze that. No. So, yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner. So we will put that on record now.
Because the point of ASEC DACI is that when you are on the accrual basis, so you spend something or you buy something until you are paying it, that's the only time that you are withholding. So that means when you withhold, the time that you withhold, that's the only time that you will remit the tax. So
Meet to the government
right now,
on a
upon-
accrual basis.
yeah, when you incur already the purchase, the expense, right?
That could mean, say, 2 to 3 months of difference from the time you withhold. So I don't know how will that affect the BIR's collection goals.
That's why in our analysis, there's no impact to the amount. It's just a timing of when government will receive the payment. No, so Asad, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chair, because it might affect also our cash programming.
Goal allocation.
In our we're balancing, no, we're also mindful of the cash position of the government. That's why in the bills, if you notice, we didn't touch on when the payment will be done. We didn't touch on the timing of the payment because that will affect the collection of the government demand. So we're balancing it very carefully, knowing that government needs to, of course, pay salaries, pay utilities. So we need cash to do that. But yeah, Attorney Lim.
Mr. Chair, perhaps the accrual method actually currently, because the withholding tax is upon accrual, upon payment or when the expense is payable, whichever comes first. So insofar as accrual is concerned, well, as a for the BIR, there's an advance collection because it's not yet paid, that expense, but then they are already able to collect. Perhaps one compromise or one thing that can be looked into is just to revert on the paid or payable, whichever comes first, rather than including accrual in the equation insofar as withholding is concerned.
We'll study that carefully, Attorney Lim, and we'll ask the BIR to include that in your list of submission to analyze. Again, we're very mindful of the cash flow of the government. So as we all know, it's we have a lot of things to pay, no? So we're balancing that carefully. But then again, we also know that having that one scheme is simple for the taxpayer, no? Because it's easier for computation purposes, no? So, but we'll wait for your position paper and also the other resource persons. You have if you have comments on this portion, please let us know also. Right. So with that, I've already.
Mr. Chair, if I
Yeah, go ahead,
have
Sec.
one last
Yeah, go
time,
ahead.
just for emphasis, Mr. Chair, on section 90 and 103, we propose to adopt the BIR, I mean the House Bills 4125's version, which is to retain the venue on the filing of estate tax returns and donors tax returns, as these are jurisdictional in nature, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
And pwede yan, the same as the others. Any AEB?
As mentioned, Mr. Chair, medyo magkagulo kasi.
So if your estate, let's say, is in Cavite and you deposit or pay, let's say, in Metro Manila, well, will that create complication? I would assume when you say estate and donors, it's the location of the asset.
No, Mr. Chair, it's usually the domicile
payer,
of the
the domicile.
resident,
Okay.
Mr. Chair. That's normally where your properties are. And we intend to keep that provision.
Yeah, go ahead, Attorney.
Yeah.
Can I add?
Regarding that comment, I don't see the difference between donors tax and estate tax versus all other kinds of tax. Wala namang difference yun eh. And especially for estate tax, namatay nandun yung tao sa Mindanao and you are the only heir dito sa Manila. If we follow yung jurisdiction where the property is or where the domicile of the decedent is, then you have to fly doon eh. Ayaw mo, tinatamad ka, di ka magbabayad. Whereas if you are already here in Manila and you can pay that, then you can pay in Manila, then that should be okay for the BIR actually. Eh, baka tama rin ka, hindi ka na uuwi doon. Nawala tuloy yung tax mo.
Aside from that, the donors and estate can be paid electronically.
Mr.
Can be
Chair,
paid.
may I add to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. The estate and the donors can be electronically filed and paid already. So the EBIR forms, there are already form types available, or the returns are available in the EBIR forms for as long as they do not download the form and pay it manually over the counter at the bank. It will be captured by where the taxpayer is domiciled. Basically, we have to trace on the domicile or address of the taxpayer because it might happen that the taxpayer is also engaged in business, the decedent. So it has to be, the closure of the business will matter during the filing of the estate as well. And the payment also electronically, it can be paid anywhere. And then after, so that's settled, they can electronically file the return, the estate tax return, and pay the taxes due. During the processing of the transfer of the property when they have to present the certificate of authorizing registration to the LRA, to the Register of Deeds, then they have really to present all the documents, that titles, the tax declarations that will really matter. So we really have to make it, the venue is in the domicile of the taxpayer, of the decedent.
But the transfer is another transaction, yun, no?
Yeah,
So
but the district office who will process the transfer of the property will retrieve all those paid taxes electronically filed and paid. So
purposes of tax payment,
anywhere,
anywhere,
electronically,
right?
yes.
So,
We have no
but
problem.
just to be consistent with the other provisions, what is being reformed here is if
Electronic.
the AABs, no, they can
If-
pay in any AABs. So just
If-
for purposes of tax payment. Now, if you want to transfer, you have no choice, but you have to fly there, no?
Yes.
Diba? You have to fly there. Bring all your documents because the LRA is not, I believe it's fully automated, you know?
Yes.
So, but for purposes of just paying your taxes, we should give that flexibility. My view is we should give that flexibility to the taxpayer.
Then we have, if it is paid or filed and paid over the counter with the AAB, and it will be anywhere, then we'll have to retrieve it. It will take maybe time.
The retrieval ba is manual?
Yes po, because if it is filed over the counter through the banks will submit, prepare the batch control sheet and give it to the district office where they are jurisdictionally located.
Go ahead, Attorney Lim.
In terms of the concern on the on pay as you file, because the return will also indicate the RDO number. So I think in terms of capturing, the collection for a particular district office, then it should be, I mean, there will be an extra step, no, to make, but it can be captured. On the payment, when you make an e-filing, and then I think there was a comment that you can pay anywhere. Actually, if it's an e-payment and you pay to the bank, it's still within the AAB, the on the RDO, so it's not really anywhere. Unless you use, of course, GCash or a credit card, but then there's a limit in terms of the payment amount that you can remit.
Oh, it's any AAB now, eh. That's the suggestion of the law. Yeah, the
Yeah, in the
proposal.
proposal,
Yeah,
yes,
any na.
yes. But yung current, because I think there
Yeah,
was a
it's current.
yeah.
Yeah. I think because the way the AE works, it's physically they deliver the documents, no. So I think the apprehension of BIR is the physical delivery of the documents. Tama po ba, Assistant?
Mr.
Oh,
On the estate and donors kasi
Yeah.
po, it will not follow where the taxpayer is registered kasi nga domicile ang sabi ng law. So it might be different. Yes, it has an RDO number, so it will be credited and can be viewed by the RDO concerned. But with regards to estate, dahil nga doon tayo nagpo-follow sa domicile and the donors. So hindi siya doon sa registered taxpayer ng decedent. So that is an exception to the flow ng system.
Yeah, and the procedure, Mr. Chair, is quite different. It needs to be processed there. Procedurally, if you settle the estate tax, first you need to get the TIN of the deceased, which is not anymore the TIN when he was alive. And the default RDO where you will get it is the place of domicile of the decedent.
My view kasi it's not as I share the same view with Attorney Dawilan that it's not it can be done, no, by process, no. It's it's not it's a tax, so it's no different than paying your other taxes. and we can, of course, amend the law on the domicile requirement. So in my view, it's much more convenient if we allow taxpayers to pay anywhere, no? But we'll wait for your position paper and see if what is the complication, and we'll also study this very carefully. No? Yeah.
We'll prepare the justification, Mr. Chair. When the House version was prepared, we really fought for that, for these two provisions as the exceptions to the all other returns that will be filed and paid anywhere, Mr. Chair. So we will prepare for the.
I was made to understand that it's in the House version. Yeah.
The House version retained the place of domicile of the decedent as well as the domicile of the donor, Mr. Chair.
And the reason for that is because of documentary requirements that are location specific. Correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
That's the reason, and it's going to be complex if you're paying, let's say, Metro Manila, and the domicile is in Mindanao, and all the documents are in Mindanao. That's the reason.
Yes, for administrative purposes, Mr. Chair, or
Okay.
is an in administration, because but if you try to look at it, the place of domicile of the decedent, that's normally where the properties are located. And perhaps the other situation, which is when you want to have ease on payment, that would be the perhaps a 10% exception to the overall population of decedents that may file that. So for us, I think it's administratively easier if we maintain that procedure, Mr. Chair.
My view kasi is we'll have that any AAB provision or any AAB feature should be applied to all, no? So that it's consistent. No? And the exception creates confusion also. No? Because sometimes you think it's applied to all and then may exception pala. No? I think that is the logic why we applied it to all forms of taxes. But we want to hear your arguments. I know that is the reason, but just include it in your position paper also, so that you can articulate it better. And all right. Any comments from our resource persons? My last question for BIR is in the Senate version, we removed the minimum gross receipts for PUVs. Diba, there's a schedule. Oo. There's a schedule. We removed that for again to simplify things, and we just want to get your comment on that. Nasaan yun? To be honest, I was so any comment to that? First of all, itong mga jeepney for hire, public utility bus, taxis, do they actually pay percentage tax?
Yes, Your Honor. All common carriers, businesses are subject to percentage taxes.
But how about the public utility vehicles?
Yes.
Do they have? Who
They are
pays?
considered as common carriers, the operators.
The operators pay?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, the threshold here are really not applicable anymore. So we base it on the actual, how much boundary do you have, do you pay? So that's the way we compute now the percentage taxes being paid, because these are not.
So obviously it's higher than the schedule.
Yes. po.
Yeah, so I guess this is removing it doesn't impact on anything. Okay, all right, all right. So I exhausted all of my questions. Any comments from the body? Kung wala naman, you can. This is an work in progress, so you can submit to us your position papers if you have last minute comments based on our hearing today. But for BIR, I have a few items, not few, no, but I have a lot of items to request, and this will help us in our analysis, in our study, especially those areas that you find quite contentious. Number one, the classification for micro, small, medium, large taxpayers. Number two, how many small and micro taxpayers registered and pay taxes. Number three, how many small, medium, large taxpayers pay withholding tax and per withholding tax type. Pareho lang to. 3 and 4.
Yung sa withholding. Tax.
That's the same.
Ay, count po ito. Ito yung amount.
Oo nga, no. And then number 4, how much withholding taxes are being collected from small, medium, large, and also the each withholding tax type. Study on the implications of timing of the withholding based on the 3 concepts: the paid, payable, or accrual, whichever is earlier, and the position on the retention of venue requirement for estate and donors. Those are the requests for BIR. So with that, I thank everyone for your participation. Thank you very much for your position paper. It really enlightened us on how to move forward. And again, if you have any more comments, feel free to send it to us so we can study it carefully. So we'll suspend first the hearing so that if we will need to call another hearing, we can open the session. So thank you very much for your time. Maraming salamat po.